So now I'd like to invite Martin Edwards, Vice President Europe at Hess, to the floor, because we'd like to have a operator perspective on the first scenario we spoke about here, which is security of supplies. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
So I'd like to hear your reflections of the previous talk. I mean, do you agree with the fact that energy demand will rise significantly, and what challenges does that pose to you?
So I think that we've seen a range of presentations, and we've seen that there's a lot of uncertainty. But one thing we see for sure is that there'll be an increase in global energy demand. I mean, the numbers that we've seen, anywhere from 10 to 40%, even higher maybe. And these of course, depend on many factors, one of which is the degree to which the world becomes, I guess, more carbon constrained. If you take just maybe a 25% increase in global energy demand across across oil, gas, nuclear, renewables, and coal, then you're looking at an increase in barrels of oil equivalent, sort of a unit that we can deal with, which from about 275 million barrels a day today, but an increase of 70 million barrels a day by 2040. I mean, that's a huge increase on top of a declining base that we have at the moment. So the challenge for the energy industry as a whole, I think, is obviously substantial. There may be an increase, and we've seen it, I think, just now, increase in renewables, maybe in gas, and declines in coal, and other moving pieces. But one of the consistent features that we see in these forecasts is that, and I think Krista just mentioned it, that oil and gas has a real role to play all the way out to 2040 in almost any of these scenarios. I think even in the IEA 450 scenario, it's still around I think 40 or 44% oil and gas part of the energy mix in 2040. So clearly we've got as an industry, we have a huge part to play. And I guess one of the things you think about is how do we fund that increase, and where does that come from?
Yeah, and basically what are the preconditions for you to be able to meet that demand?
Yeah. So if you look at the sort of, you think about that increase of 70 million barrels, you look at the IEA most likely scenario, and you get to a sort of a sum of somewhere around $25 trillion that the oil and gas industry would have to invest to be able to achieve that increase in capacity. And that's, again, huge numbers. And if you look at recent behavior, recent market conditions, you have to worry. I mean, in the last few years, the investment in the oil and gas industry, in field development, exploration, has, I think, somewhere halved, somewhere around from $700 billion a year, down to about somewhere $400 billion a year. So you have to think, in the medium term, maybe not immediately, but the investment pace at the moment is not keeping pace with that. And it comes, Bob McNally's boom comes to mind here, and other sort of price, volatility in price as we go forward. It's obviously also a kind of huge opportunity for investment. I think from our perspective, as a company, Hess, we've tried to invest through the cycle. We've actually we've reduced our global spend, like almost every other company. But we've had a couple of major projects in Asia and in the Gulf of Mexico, and even in the mature basin of the North Sea, we've kept investment going. So at South Arne in Denmark over the last few years, I think we've spent somewhere around $1 billion, and currently development drilling in Valhall, which is our big asset in Norway, just across the border.
Mm-hmm. So we just heard a speech from the Minister of Business in Denmark. And what are your perspectives on that, and what role there is for government in Denmark to play? I mean, what's important for you when we talk, for instance, about the policies of the North Sea region?
All right, so if we come now from the global picture to Europe, And of course, the energy demand picture is very different. I think we've seen it. It's more of an evolution of the mix. Clearly, there's an increase in renewables, but even in Europe, we see oil playing a key role, maybe 30% part of the mix out to 2040.
And even coal.
Yeah, and so maybe there is if you look at Europe as an entity, then there clearly seems to be an opportunity for more domestic growth in both oil and gas. I think Europe is importing something like 20 BCF a day of gas and something like 9 million barrels of 9 million barrels of oil. So clearly an opportunity there.
And so you think, did you address the perspective of the Danish government? What could they do in order to make your life easier?
Yeah, so I think when you sort of look at the challenge that we have this sort of energy trilemma of supply and continuity on one hand, affordability, and then also our environmental responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so we look at it in that kind of sense. If you go through to the position here in Denmark, there is, of course, we've seen recently some changes. We have, if we had messages for the government, I think we would say, first of all, think of this as, and I think it's been displayed today, as a very long-term business. The plans that we made, the investments, the decisions we make are over extremely long term. And with that in mind, I guess there's sort of three things that we might consider. And one would be, think of us as part of this green transition. We are, whichever way you look at it, oil and gas in Europe and globally, there'll be demand. I think the minister spoke about continuing to produce oil and gas in Denmark, even in the transition within the country. So I think, first of all, we're here, and I think the collaboration between the Oil and Gas Denmark and the government, I think, is key in that, and keeping that a very open and long and far-reaching, I guess, conversation. The second thing is, and it's been touched on already, is around the fiscal arrangements and establishing, I think, competitive, stable, predictable fiscal terms, but also those that are internationally competitive. I mean, as an international company ourselves, when we look at investments in Denmark, obviously we look at in competition with other opportunities around the world. And we've heard about the North Sea agreement and the Tura development, and clearly Tura is really a linchpin in the Danish industry here. And I think we regard, and Troels may have mentioned it at the beginning, this is a kind of a first step, I think. Clearly, again, Oil and Gas Denmark is, the collaboration between government policymakers, Oil and Gas Denmark, and open and transparent conversation at that level, I think, is what we see we need. Mm-hmm. And finally, I think there's a culture of driving towards lower cost and industry and government working together on that. And infrastructure sharing, of course, is one. Again, it's been mentioned today, and that's, I think, come out of the strategy work that completed earlier this year. And again, having a body like Oil and Gas Denmark working this and thinking of this long term, I think is very important. I think there's a long way to go if you think back to the competitive terms. Where Denmark is self-sufficient in oil and gas right now, and it looks like it will be through the 2030s. Mm-hmm. The question is, if we want to be self-sufficient to 2050, then we probably need something else and something more, because we need to get that investment. If you look at the number of exploration wells that are planned in the next few years, I think it's very low.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can take a quick question from the floor.
Martin, when you're a producer, when you're an oil and gas company, and we are hearing the presentations today, you've got peak oil, you have got energy demands rising, Boston booms, and whatever you have up there, resulting in reduced investment from the oil and gas companies. I could claim it sounds a little bit actually as panic, because the long-term prediction everybody agrees on, that oil and gas will be needed, energy is rising, and the consequence, as we heard in the UK, with 400,000 employees going to 300,000, is lack of qualified people in the business, and that's basically poison. Where oil and gas wants, operators really want stable oil prices. Suppliers want actually stable investment to keep on up the service that we are providing. So my argument is that we're actually seeing a little bit of panic. I know it's logical because you need to do something when your income are being reduced. Do you have any opinion, ideas on what could we do to change this in a way that we would stabilize this a little bit in the future?
Do you mean from the educational perspective, or from an investment?
I mean, if the investment goes down, the employment in the entire industry will logically also go down. That's how it is. And when it's back in a boom position, and also has been in the industry for many years, we know what will follow after a drop. That's the normal thing, and the next thing that will happen is raise in prices, and then we see a new reduction, and that's the pendulum that's swinging. But a more stable investment would be better for everybody, including the operators, even though I know it's short-term decision that's driving it. But can we do anything different, or is that just what we will have to accept?
I think that's a tough challenge. I mean, I think that I mentioned the energy trilemma, and there were sort of three elements to that. One is around continuity and stability of supply, which is what we as an industry try to provide. The second, I think, is affordability and providing energy at. I think from our part, there may be there are issues around moving affordably to a green transition at a government level. From our part, I think that involves working very closely to try to reduce our costs with suppliers, with contractors, with vendors. Working, I think, part of the North Sea strategy is to look at how we develop education and training for the offshore industry. So I think one of the key elements about this is to actually drive in a collaborative way towards a lower cost situation, and that should improve our investment potential. At the same time, the other part of the trilemma is environmental responsibility. And I think that there are two things that probably go hand in hand, is driving towards lower cost in a collaborative way with all of the players in the industry, but also moving towards, as far as we can, to lower carbon intensity in our production.
Right, okay. Mr. Edwards, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. Thank you.